Hey, you're listening to Just a Cup on Believe. I'm host Brian Fetzer. And today our guest really blew my mind when I started, talking to him for the first time. It's such a unique story. You think about somebody it's a journalist with finances, but then becomes an author of a book about sports. And we'll kind of get all that tied in together. Nick Peck is my guest today, who is an award-winning author and wrote the book Only Way Out, which fascinating story. Nick, there it is. I'm fired up to take a deep dive into you and your journey, because you're the first author that we've had on the broadcast. And so I'm very very intrigued, to say the least.
Well, I hope my story can live up to your expectations, because I appreciate it for sure, and just super grateful to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
No, okay. So your journey, like everybody has a journey story of how they got to where they're at and what they're trying to do with it. And yours is very unique. And so let's talk about, you played college football, but you didn't go the route necessarily that most people might go, playing college ball.
Yeah, no. So I'll just kind of, give my own background story, because I think that helps add to it. So like, I grew up in California. I grew up, in a super traumatic, alcoholic, abusive household. And just was around a lot of things like that. So I myself was always looking for a way out of my situation. And I found that in sports. I played football, baseball, and basketball throughout my years in high school, but ultimately fell in love with football and ultimately being the best at it. That was the sport I ended up being one of the best at. And then in high school, I think I was pretty highly recruited, was getting letters, getting lots of scholarship offers. I committed to a school that I'm going to say unnamed, but on signing day, they basically called me and were like, "Hey, we gave away your scholarship to someone else. Would you be willing to walk on?" And I was like, "No, if I don't have a scholarship, there's no way I can go to college." So at the time, I was playing offensive line. I was 325 pounds. And I was calling back all the other schools I had offers from, but back when it wasn't, the NIL transfer portal days where there's so many opportunities. Everyone had already kind of signed, and that chapter was closed. So I ended up going junior college, went to Mount Sac Junior College. And while I was there, I was still playing offensive line, but I was like, you know what? I am kind of tired of being 325 pounds. So I slowly but surely started to shed the weight and teach myself how to long snap. And was just watched videos on YouTube, was watching NFL games, and lost close to like 125 pounds, and then was posting videos of myself on YouTube, and then was lucky enough to on YouTube and Twitter at the time, and was lucky enough to get a full ride scholarship long snapping. So that's a little bit of my journey.
The simple fact that you taught yourself how to long snap on YouTube is a complete story in itself, because that's just if you've never long snapped and you're listening or watching, long snapping is not easy.
No.
Easy at all. And you get blown up at times.
You do.
While you're long snapping.
You do. Yeah. It's such a specialty. I like to compare it to, almost more similar to like a golf swing, or, a tennis. Or right. Tennis, it's not necessarily, a traditional position in football where it's, schematic, everyone's working together. It's, at the end of the day, it's kickers and long snappers. It's, if you don't make your play, there's not, someone else that you can make put an excuse on. So it's very specialty that hits the special teams. But yeah, it was a crazy journey to learn how to do it.
So, was finance something or journalism something you majored in college? Is that how you kind of got in that vein?
Yeah, funny enough, writing and journalism, I knew that's what I always wanted to do. Sports and football for me was, like I said, my way out of my situation. So I knew as soon as, it was time for me to hang up the cleats and, call it a day, I knew I wanted to jump straight into journalism. But I didn't necessarily want to go into sports journalism, just because, one, it felt almost too easy to me. I kind of wanted a challenge and something different. And then two, I have a lot of buddies that are either playing in the NFL or the NBA, and I didn't want to, have to use my insider info on them to, better my career. So I was like, why don't we move away from something else and, And I'm like kind of a nerd too, so I like to like nerd out on topics, and finance and the stock market and ETFs is about, as nerdy as you can get. So that's kind of how I jumped into the world of finance as a
What
journalist.
what's it like, being on the other end, writing stuff? I mean, you're doing a podcast right now, but the interviewing part from the financial aspects. You're a senior financial journalist. What is that like, going in, talking to people that are at typically such a high level in their industry? What is that like?
I mean, for me, I found that it's kind of almost, I don't want to say easy, but easy in a sense, just because I'm not, your typical journalist. As you can see, I'm covered in tattoos from head to toe.
We'll get
I'm
to that next.
and, and I'm from California, so I don't, I'm just kind of unapologetically myself. I'm wearing my Dickie pants, my Air Force Ones, and I'm walking into, Vanguard, interviewing, the CEO of Vanguard or the CIO of BlackRock, and they're like, who is this kid that is coming in? Because I'm not, your typical journalist. So it's for me, it's been nice. And then on top of it, I'm an athlete too, and that's an easy, easy into a lot of these conversations with people. Everyone always wants to talk about sports. But I think the biggest thing is, I'm just kind of unapologetically myself. So I think that's kind of what helps me, walk into those things and not be afraid to have these conversations with these guys who are managing billions and billions of
Right.
dollars.
So okay, you got you're sleeved up. I mean, most people that get tattoos, there is something behind each tattoo. There's some meaning, some personal stuff. What is yours? Or, well, actually, I met somebody the other day that I'm like, what's your tattoos mean? And they're like, oh, I just like the design. I'm like, really? Something different.
Yeah.
Does yours have special meaning, or?
Yeah, almost pretty much all of them have special meaning. Like right here, I don't know if you can see that I've got, a deck of cards, because when I was growing up, when stuff was hard, I took this out of Ray Lewis's playbook, but deck of cards, flip a deck of cards doing push-ups, and those kind of
Yeah.
things that help me. And I have my little sister's handwriting on me that says all of it, because when we were both going through, those experiences at home, we would always look at each other, hey, like, what's wrong? What's wrong? And we just look at each other, all of it, those kind of things. So they all kind of have meaning, and my knuckles say self-made. So they've all got meaning for sure.
That is awesome. Well, I mean, one thing they do is they tell a story.
Yeah.
They tell a story of who you are and how you got to where you're at. And speaking of that specifically, getting to the point of writing a book, when did you know you wanted to write one that was the way you wrote Only Way Out?
I think I always, like I said, I grew up, I love reading. I love books. So I always knew I wanted to write it. But once I transitioned out of football, it was kind of one of those things where it was like, I loved journalism, but I knew there was something else. I needed something else to fulfill that hole for me. And I was trying out a bunch of different things. And then, ultimately I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna, write a book. Like, it was as simple as that for me. And, I just started doing it. And as I was doing it, it was like, man, this feels like what I'm truly meant to do. And, just kept doing it. And then, finished my manuscript and was lucky enough to get a publishing contract. And, here we are, published and doing those things. I just became an Amazon bestseller last week. So it's like, it's been a whirlwind of emotions, and just super grateful.
So give the audience a little bit of understanding of Only Way Out. What, I mean, because it centers around an athlete.
Yep.
And their kind of journey through a really rough patch in life.
Yeah. So the story itself covers Jalen Pierre, and I like to say, it's loosely based on experiences from my own life, because it covers 1 year. But obviously, when you go through so much in life, it's not all in 1 year.
Right.
But for the story's sake, that is what it is. And basically, Jalen is, grows up, in poverty, deals with lots of trauma daily, but is also taking care of a younger sibling like I did, and just ultimately, is looking for his way out. And he becomes inspired late one night watching a television special about this football player who kind of grew up in similar situations as him, which is just as true to my story, which is why I even decided to play football in the first place. And he just kind of goes through the experience of playing sports for the first time, and then all the other things that you deal with. He's a high school senior, so relationships and all those kind of things.
You are listening to Just a Cup on Believe. I am host Brian Fetzer. Have with me right now Nick Peck, who is award-winning author, just recently Amazon best-selling author, I should say, of the book Only Way Out. And we're getting in a little more discussion on the book itself. Having somebody that's dealt, in the book frame of things, having dealt with issues and with issues that deal with mental health, and how that has become a lot more forefront now than it might have been 4, 5, 10 years ago. When you're kind of getting your story through and dealing with the mental health side of things, somebody going through some tough parts, how taking your own personal experiences and putting it in the book, did that help you out as an individual? Kind of like, hey, I want to share thoughts with others that could maybe impact or help them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of why I wanted to tell the story too, and wanted to tell it, not from an autobiographical stance, but tell it from a fiction stance, because then anybody can put themselves, in Jalen Pierre's shoes, whether, you're dealing with poverty or mental health or having to care for someone your age, those things. And, it did help me, to realize, what I've come through, things that I've dealt with, the things that I've seen and been around. So it did help me, kind of be like, wow, because I think sometimes we kind of forget to take a deep breath and like, oh, we did accomplish a lot of things of where we're at now.
Right.
So it definitely did help me. But, the biggest thing is, why I wrote the story is like, because I want people to be able to put themselves in Jalen Pierre's shoes. And, it doesn't necessarily have to be the same issues that they're dealing with, but, that there's always a way out of the situation that you're in.
I was just getting ready to say, if there's one point about the book that you really convey, what would that point be? And obviously the title kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah, I mean, he goes through a lot in it, and I think the other things that are important in the book itself too is just, he builds a sense of community through his team and his coaches. Because I think a lot of times when you're growing up and, trauma or poverty or whatever it is, you seem to, isolate yourself a lot and not think that you have people who have your back. But in the story, a coach, literally the name is the same exact coach that did it for me. His name's Coach Buster. He passed away when I was in high school, but he is in the book. And literally Jalen has that experience. Like for the first time, someone gives Jalen a pair of football gloves, and that like changed his whole life because someone gave him something, and, those kind of things. So I think on top of, finding ways out of it is, building a sense of community, and how you can use sport or music or whatever it is to take yourself out of those situations, but also, find the comfort that you need that you may not be getting at home or elsewhere.
When I say the word identity, what comes to your mind with that word? Because it's something with sport. A lot of times people get, their identity from sport.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, and that's, it's something I dealt with too. I think it kind of going back to what I said, like what made me write the book in the first place is even though football for me was, just my way out of my situation, it still was my identity, even though it wasn't everything for me. So that's, I totally get that, with, putting your identity behind it. But now where I'm at in my life now, I try not to put myself, as a journalist or an author. I try to just kind of be present in whatever it is I'm doing and kind of take on that identity for the time being, but then also letting it go and, not taking on, if I have a podcast interview that I wasn't happy, not being, oh man, why did I say that? Just letting it go and letting those things kind of happen, just kind of be in the flow of life, instead of trying to identify as myself. Hey, I'm Nick Peck, the journalist and author, no, I'm Nick Peck, the human, no matter what I'm doing.
A lot of times journalists, at least that I've come across, journalists or authors are pretty, inward, like they're not real engaging. You obviously are not that way. What makes a difference? And I'm sure you've met some authors or journalists yourself that are very closed to the outside. They let the writing kind of do their talking. Mm-hmm. What makes a difference for you?
I think one, obviously just being an athlete, so I've kind of grown up in front of a camera, whether you want it or not. I'm not saying obviously I'm the superstar and doing these kind of things, but I have done interviews before and I have, talked to reporters before and, games are always being filmed on TV or streamed elsewhere. So it's, I'm used to, having to perform, in front of a camera, and it's, just kind of second nature to me. But that's not to say that the other, I don't like to let my writing speak for itself too. I think it's when you're proud and you work hard at what you do, you just kind of have an innate confidence to want to share the things with the world and not, not be afraid to it. And, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take at the end of the day. So that's just my thought is like, why am I going to put myself in a hole and not try to, just keep shoot, you got to keep shooting no matter what.
Right. Who's the most intriguing individual you got to write a story about?
Most intriguing. I want to say probably it was, actually earlier this year, I was working for another publication where I was covering law and, I was doing more of, profile stories. And it was just so interesting to hear about these guys who are doing these big M&A deals and the stories that go behind the deals themselves and how it affects their families. And, they're in at 3 a.m., they're taking phone calls and like, how are we going to get this deal done? And we're talking about like $4 or $5 billion deals and those things, So I don't necessarily know if there's like specific story, but I think I love hearing, what goes on behind the scenes of, a trade of an ETF or a stock market going, or someone going live on the stock market, or like I said, a big M&A deal. It's all of them to me are super, interesting and exciting, but that's part of me, like I said, being a nerd and interested in the behind the scenes of everything.
Well, I can completely relate to that. It's a lot. So how about yourself? What is something if somebody said, what's something that's really intriguing about Nick that most people wouldn't know? What would that be?
I would say probably, I'm obsessed with, meditation and yoga. Those are probably like the two most important things in my life. And obviously, being a football player, being covered in tattoos, those kind of things don't necessarily always come out. But, I meditate every single morning. I do yoga every single day. Those are like two of the most important things in my life and help take care of me. So I'd say that's probably would be the most interesting that because, outside looking in, it doesn't necessarily seem like I would be the biggest meditator and or yoga doer, but I love those things. And without them, I don't know where I'd be.
How did you get into yoga and meditation?
It was part of, just kind of dealing with trauma and my own mental health battles and, exploring things that I thought would work for me, trying things. Cause I mean, at the end of the day, being in a weight room and playing football can only do so much for you. It only lets out that anger side of things. But doesn't necessarily always let out, the emotional aspects, the sadness, or, even just comprehending things that you went through. So that I just
Right.
found those and kind of, like I said, I love to read. So I dove into, reading all kinds of books on meditation and yoga and just, the benefits that they could give me on top of, also helping me heal from all the trauma and things that I went through in my own life.
You mentioned it earlier, really when we first started, that you kind of used football as kind of a way to deal with the trauma that you were, experiencing in your own life. Have you seen other people do the same thing kind of through a situation, or do you read about it or hear about it and kind of think the same?
For sure. I mean, I think almost every athlete, for the most part, especially once you get to those higher levels, everyone is using football as a way to take them away from something, whether it be the things that I mentioned or even, other things outside of it too. And I think that's the beautiful thing of sport is, you can use your body to do something to take yourself out of, whatever you want to get into. And like I said, in the story, where Jalen's inspired by the football player on TV, that was me. I watched my favorite football player growing up was Patrick Willis, and I seen an E60 documentary on him, how he used football to help take him and his family out of his situation. And I was like, man, you could do it. You can do those things. So those stories are out there everywhere, and even those who don't share their stories. Like I said, I've had teammates and homies and everyone who uses those things to take themselves out.
When you hear about this, the stigmatism of mental health, in your experience, what is a way that somebody could kind of get past that stigma? of hey, mental health, you got a mental health issue, there's something wrong with you, is kind of the old kind of version of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is just, you know, just knowing it's okay to feel the way that you're feeling. I think a lot of times when you're going through these mental health battles, even me when I've been at, depth's end, at the very bottom, it's, you just remind yourself that it's okay. And I think the stigma behind it is that we all want to say that we're perfect, or, we have nothing going on in our lives, but it's okay to not be okay. But what's not okay is to not take care of yourself when you're not feeling okay, or reaching out to those around you, to do those things. And I think the stigma is dying though. Luckily, I'm super happy and grateful for that. And, conversations like this where people, having these conversations where people can feel like, oh, it's okay to feel, depressed or anxious or whatever it may be that you're dealing with.
Have you had individuals since the book's come out, have you had individuals reach out to you and say, hey, Nick, reading this story really touched me in my, issues that I have that I'm dealing with?
Yeah, honestly, that's been my favorite part of the whole thing is, just getting these emails from people, and from old people all the way up to, kids or teenagers that have read the book and sending me stuff and saying, man, you really inspired me to be open with what I'm feeling, or, that I felt low, but I love seeing how Jalen used football to take himself out. And I love when they name my characters' names and those things. Like, it's been such a rewarding experience for me. And at the end of the day, that's what I'm doing it for. Because like I said, for me, this is not like a money grab or anything like that. Like, this truly feels like what I'm meant to do. And I want to just be able to continue to tell stories and share stories that can help inspire people, even if it is, just one part of the book that can, sit with somebody. But yeah, it's been really rewarding to get those kind of emails and Instagram messages and everything.
Oh, I mean, one, where can somebody buy, before I forget, where can somebody get the book?
Yeah, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, pretty much anywhere that you can find a book, you can get it. Yeah, and my Instagram has all the links, at Nick Peck Author, so those you can find it easier that way too. So yeah, pretty much anywhere that you can buy a book.
So I've had a couple other friends, write books and know some people who wrote books, and after they wrote it, they thought, well, I got to write another one. Is that kind of in the cards?
Oh, for sure. Like I said, I plan on doing this for the rest of my life. Like I said, this truly feels like what I'm meant to do. Like, as long as, books are relevant, which I think they forever will be, I'm going to continue to write, and continue to, tell stories, and, for as long as I possibly can, until the wheels fall off, literally.
Well, it's become an issue, not an issue, but a kind of thing that kind of happens now. I mean, there's Netflix, there's Prime, there's Apple TV. Is that a possibility for the book?
I've had talks with people, and those are things that, I would obviously love to explore. And, I feel like it's a story that it's worth being told, on camera and things like that. And, open to any opportunities that come my way. Like I said, I've had some conversations before, but, I would love those kind of things to have that opportunity. It would be another dream come true.
Oh, I mean, it's definitely, as you kind of go through it and kind of see the journey of it, 100%. I could see sitting back watching Only Way Out on Netflix at some point in time, and I mean, hey, there's even some athletes you could cast in there, right?
For sure, for sure. And like the thing that I love about the story too, which I've also appreciated, is, everyone thinks it's just, a football story itself. When you just, outside looking in, obviously who's selling it and those kind of things, but so much more than that. And that's been the other rewarding thing, having, teenage girls and, older women reach out and tell me this story is so impactful and means something to me too. So because it's not just a football story, and like, that's what I think is, so powerful about it too. So yeah, I love it. I love it.
It definitely transcends across. What advice could you give from personal experiences to individuals that are going through, a rough patch in life?
I think the only thing that separates, any great person, from accomplishing anything, me or whoever else, is, you just don't quit on your journey, and quitting doesn't always have to mean, quitting something literally, but, when you are deep down in those depths and having suicidal ideations and those kind of things. Don't quit. Just remember, life's a marathon. It's not a sprint. Just you have to keep running your race, and you're eventually will get to where you want to go. So I would say the biggest thing is, just don't quit. There's so many seasons in life, and there's so many things that are gonna be thrown at you. But the biggest thing is you just don't quit and keep running your race until the wheels fall off.
Man, that's definitely some good advice. A lot of people need to hear that directly. I think sometimes, anytime you're a business owner, you're starting something, also that, hey, you never know when things are going to click at one point in time, and then you're going to be rolling on.
It's that I don't know, it's like a graphic that you see on social media every now and then. It's that guy, he's like mining or something, and there's right there, you see he's so close to, the diamonds or the gold or whatever it is he's mining for, but he's walking away. You never know how close you are to accomplishing your dreams. So that's why, as long as you keep chasing after them and don't quit, no matter what comes your way, you'll be successful regardless.
It's so true. I mean, there's a fine line between success and failure.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times you never know until, you quit and you don't know what could have been, or you press on, you go forward, and incredible things happen.
Yeah. And I think that's the important thing, is just to keep pressing forward, even in those low moments, and even those moments that doesn't feel like anything's working your way. I think we get so fixated on getting to the end product instead of, just appreciating the journey itself. And so that's another thing I would say, add to it too, is, appreciate the journey that you're on, regardless if it's, writing a book or starting a business. Appreciate the journey. There's going to be ups and downs, but I have a saying that I grew up that told myself is, it's no bad days. Like, day's either good or a day to learn from. And that's just, I think, the biggest lesson I've learned on my journey is, like, even those days that are quote unquote bad, instead of looking at it from that sense, I try to look at it, how can I grow from it? How can I learn from it?
Well, let me ask you this question, because I've been thinking about it as you've been talking. If somebody wanted to get into writing a book, or sharing their story through words, through a novel or short story, or whatever it might be,
mm-hmm.
How could they go about that? I mean, how could somebody, pick up the pen or do something? Like, how did you write the book per se?
I think like anything, it's just starting. And I think people get so afraid of, starting something. Whether it's you writing a book, or, like I said, starting a business or starting a new sport, it's just the act of starting, and then staying consistent on it every single day. Like, when I decided to write the book, I would get up literally at like 4 a.m. every single day before work. And I was like, I'm going to write 5 pages every morning. And I would just do that. And I did that for 6 months. And then I had a book after 6 months, and just stayed consistent with it. So I think the biggest thing is just, picking up the pen and doing it, but then, also, having the discipline and consistency enough to keep it up and keep going with it. Because there are days where you don't want to write, but those are the days that you need to push through those things. Yeah.
Did you have anybody help you with writing the book?
No, pretty much. I mean, like I said, I got self-made on me for a reason. I take pride in that. But, I was lucky enough to have like a really good publisher, that had really good departments after. But, for the most part of writing the book itself, I wrote it, read it out loud to myself, probably more times than I'd like to admit, before I decided to send it to anyone. And I was like, okay, I think this is good. And, lo and behold, I was lucky enough that it was.
That's awesome. When you found out that it was an Amazon bestseller, what was your first reaction?
Just gratitude. I just felt an oversense of gratitude, and so grateful for where I'm at. Because, like I said, I went through so much in my life, and just to be able to accomplish those kind of things, just super grateful to be there. And it just made me even more excited, for what's yet to come for me. Because, like, I am only 24 years old, so I still have a lot of time left on this journey, and I'm still lucky to have found what I love to do so early on, and have seen some success in it so quickly. So yeah, just gratitude and excited.
When you're doing your, with working on your job as a journalist, you ever slide the book to some of your some of the people you're doing interviews with and say, hey, you might want to read this?
Funny enough, the asset management industry is, it's a very tight industry. And, I posted just some stuff on LinkedIn, and I'll be in interviews with, some of these large firms, and whether it's the CIO or the public relations people, like, hey, we read your book, it's so good, I gave it to my son, I gave it to my daughter. And it's been really cool to see the support there too. Obviously, I've been lucky enough to win some awards as a journalist too, so it kind of built my credibility there. But it's been nice to see them embrace that, and everyone's super supportive, and all my colleagues at work are super supportive and sending me messages, and they'll see me being an Amazon bestseller, like, oh my gosh, I'm so proud of you. So it's just it's been great. It's really been a great experience.
That's amazing. I'm going to get you out on one more question, and you kind of answered, but I want to take up a little deeper dive. If you had to go back to you at the beginning when things were going kind of south, they were going crazy, and things were tough and stressful, what advice would you give to Nick way back?
I think the biggest thing is, one, like I said, the don't quit. Just don't give up, because I think we all want to give up at some point. But then, the other thing is to remind yourself that you're not alone. On this journey, you're not doing everything alone. Like, I joke and have self-made tatted on me, but I've been lucky enough to have, so many great mentors and coaches and teachers that have supported me along my journey, with them even knowing what I was going through and not going through. So I would say, the biggest thing is, keep running that race and don't quit. But the other thing is, you're not alone. Because I think when you are in those situations where it's like everything feels like it's going wrong, you tend to feel like you are alone, even if there are a lot of people out there. But you're never alone. There's always somebody cheering you on, even if you know it or not. And there's somebody, who wants to see you do good. So, keep running the race, and remember, you're not alone.
That is an awesome kind of summation of everything. Nick, thanks for joining me. This was awesome. Your story is amazing, and it's very encouraging and enlightening. And hopefully people will go out and keep buying the book, Only Way Out. It's the story about a young man and his journey with football, kind of helping him along the way, and dealing with so much in life. So Nick, thank you so much for jumping on Just a Cup.
No, I appreciate the time. And like I said, just super grateful for the opportunity. I love the work you guys are doing. For
one more time, give us where we can get the book.
So Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and then, like I said, go ahead everywhere else you can buy a book, and then at Nick Peck Author on Instagram. I got all the links up there and all the interviews that I do and stuff like that. So
that is perfect. Well, we appreciate you joining Just a Cup. Hey, if you liked the episode, or if you didn't like the episode, it doesn't matter to me. No, I'm just kidding. It does matter to me. We want to continue to make things better, and we hope that you'll like and subscribe and share it with as many people. And you can follow us on LinkedIn. You can get us on YouTube, and then Believe.com and the Believe Network. It's every team, every topic, everywhere. That's Believe. For Brian Fetzer, my guest Nick Peck, have a great one and be blessed.